That the Prime Minister is not worth the price of food after 8 years of inflation. But yesterday he couldn't answer how a mushroom farm in my riding is supposed to pay its $100,000 carbon tax bill. Well, he did send the farm a Christmas present, a new bill. This is the November 9th to December 6th bill. Federal carbon tax, $16,050 for 1 month. And it's not even winter yet, Mr. Speaker. How would the Prime Minister like this farm to pay this $16,000 monthly bill? Raise food prices?
I also have to warn people about using props in the House. The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very happy to be I was in Dubai.
Well, I'm going to allow the Honourable Minister to start from scratch. The Honourable Minister of Environment.
I was in Dubai at COP28 in good company, Mr. Speaker, with the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, with the Premier of Saskatchewan, Scott Moe, with representatives from almost all the Canadian provinces and business leaders from all across the country, Mr. Speaker, working to ensure that our kids and grandkids have a future, something, unfortunately, that the Conservatives fail to understand.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this is more high-flying, high-cost, high-tax hypocrisy from the Minister of Carbon Taxes. We learned that he spent $150,000 on 1 weekend of travel and charged it to taxpayers. Isn't it interesting that that's exactly how much they're charging the Carleton Mushroom Farm in carbon taxes for a year? So, can the Minister please tell us, the Carleton Mushroom Farms is going to spend this year now about $150,000 grand on carbon taxes. Will that just pay for one of his junkets?
I also have to remind members just to use the proper names of the ministers. The Honourable Minister.
In reference to hypocrisy, Mr. Speaker, I refer back to Neville Chamberlain when he referred to Czechoslovakia's invasion by Nazi Germany. And in that, he referred to Czechoslovakia as a faraway land. And in reply to that, Sir Winston Churchill gave one of his greatest speeches. He gave a speech of impunity that Roy Jenkins said was one of his greatest, calling him an absolute coward, a capitulator. We should learn from such great men.
Near Bow Island grows spearmint, peppermint, and dill, then distills those crops into essential oils. The 10-week harvest and distillation process this fall alone cost them $107,000 in carbon taxes. And that carbon tax will rise to well over $400,000 when this government quadruples it. How does the Prime Minister suggest Quattro Farms pay this $400,000? Will it be by raising prices on Canadians, or should Quattro Farms cut back on their production so Canadians are forced to import their food from polluting foreign farms?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate my honourable colleague's question, but when it came to action, my honourable colleague and the Conservative Party of Canada voted against every program that would support agriculture. Mr. Speaker, it's a shame. Talking to agricultural producers right across the country, they cannot understand why a government, why an opposition would vote against on-farm climate action fund, a fund to help farmers adapt to climate change, which adds to the price of groceries.
The Honourable Member for Medicine Hat, Carson Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The reason we voted against them is we voted non-confidence in this attack.
Non-confidence!
Medicine Hat area is home to numerous greenhouse operations like Big Marble Farms, who grow fresh vegetables like cucumbers, peppers, and tomatoes. This year alone, Big Marble Farms will pay over $500,000 in carbon tax, and that'll rise over $2 million when this government quadruples it. How does the Prime Minister suggest Big Marble pay this extra $2 million? Will they raise the prices on Canadians, or should Big Marble cut back on their production so Canadians are forced to import their food from foreign polluting farms?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
and talking to farmers across the country, they cannot understand why the opposition party would vote against so many programs that assist agriculture across the country. But also, farmers find it very, very disappointing and cannot believe that you would vote against support for the Ukraine, to support for democracy. They were ashamed.
The honourable member for Dufferin-Caledon.
Unlike that minister, I actually spoke to farmers from Dufferin today, and one farmer from Burnett Farms is going to pay $40,000 in carbon taxes this year alone. And after this incompetent Liberal NDP government quadruples the tax, it will be $160,000. They don't need another government program. They need the carbon tax cut. So, how is this farmer supposed to pay for it? Cut production, or so they have to import food from foreign polluting farms.
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What many Canadians are puzzled with is the fact that in the age of climate change, where the impacts of climate change are costing our farmers hundreds of millions of dollars every year, the Conservatives have nothing to say to them. No plans to support them in the transition that will be necessary, Mr. Speaker, to be in the 21st century, to continue being a provider of food for Canada and the world. The Conservatives have no plan to help our farmers, no plan to fight climate change, and no plan to support the future of our kids and grandkids.
The honourable member for Dufferin-Caledon.
With that statement, this radical carbon tax loving environment minister has basically proven the point. His carbon tax hasn't stopped any of the effects on farms, but instead, farmers are left paying this punishing carbon tax. A chicken farm pays $15,000 for one barn this year in carbon tax. And after this ideologically obsessed minister quadruples the carbon tax, it'll be $60,000 for one chicken farm. What is this farmer supposed to do to pay it? Raise prices or force Canadians to import their food from polluting foreign farms?
The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Ironic, Mr. Speaker, coming from a party that voted against supporting chicken farms just last week, Mr. Speaker. But, you know, is it radical to be in favor of fighting for the future of our kids and grandkids? I don't think so. Is it radical to ensure that we invest in jobs of the 21st century in our communities across the country? I don't think so, Mr. Speaker. What is radical is to ignore one of the world's most defining issues of our time and have nothing to say about climate change. This is unacceptable. This is immoral, Mr. Speaker.
After 8 years of this Liberal NDP government, farmers are struggling under the weight of this punishing carbon tax. Karen, a chicken farmer from Norfolk, pays $350 every month in carbon taxes. When the Liberals quadruple the carbon taxes, she will be paying $1,400 a month. Will this Prime Minister tell farmers like Karen how she's going to pay for the carbon tax hike? Should she charge Canadians more for food, or should she produce less so that Canadians will be forced to import food from polluting foreign farms?
Good question. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Again, Mr. Speaker, it's a bit rich to hear them talk about the support for farmers when they voted against support for farmers just last week. As we support farmers to transition so that they can reduce their dependencies on fossil fuel, they can become more competitive in Canada and around the world. What are they doing? They're voting against it, Mr. Speaker. They say they're in favor of farmers, but unfortunately, their record speaks the opposite. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Haldeman Norfolk.
Quadrupling the carbon taxes has very serious consequences. Karen deserves answers about how she's going to pay that $1,400 a month hike in carbon taxes. The Prime Minister said that farmers are working hard to protect the environment, but instead of rewarding them, the Liberal NDP government is taxing them into the ground. Does this Prime Minister expect farmers like Karen to charge more, or should she produce less so that Canadians will be forced to import food from polluting foreign farms?
More expensive food.
The Honourable Minister of Health. Speaker, and of course we know the Conservatives voted against farmers. They voted against taking action on climate change, but they have also voted against dental care. That's 9 million people, Mr. Speaker, who they don't want to have access to dental care. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of seniors who they're saying are not going to be able to get dentures replaced if they were in government. They're talking about more than 1 million kids that they would say no, they can't get critical dental care because they want to vote against it. Their real agenda, Mr. Speaker, is cuts. When you look through the slogans, that's all that's there.
Cuts.
You're going to pay for it.
The honourable member for Tobique-Mactaquac.
Mr. Speaker, what we did was vote non-confidence in that government that needs to be replaced. After 8 years of this NDP Liberal government, Canadians from coast to coast are desperate for relief. A potato farming couple from Grand Sault has seen their freight cost alone rise over $300,000 a year due to the implementation of the carbon tax. Now these Liberals plan to quadruple it, which would cost them $1.2 million more in freight charges alone a year. How will the Prime Minister advise them to pay for this additional $1.2 million? Will it be by raising prices on Canadians, or should this farmer cut back on production so Canadians are forced to import food from polluting foreign nations?
The Honourable Minister of Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I think the rest of us, at least on this side of the House, can see what's happening here. I think we can see what's happening here. Those weren't votes against government programs. Those were all just non-confident votes. We didn't mean that. We didn't mean any of that.
I'm just waiting for a point where the Honourable Minister can respond. The Honourable Minister of Labour.
They think that what they just did there is all you have to do. It's not. What we do here is vote on the things. You voted against all the things. We've taken them all, and we will be using them in ads, in answers to questions, talking to our constituents on each and every one of them. We will, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the opportunity.
Has been operating their family farm since 1930. They farm about 2,000 acres, and this year they will pay $10,000 in carbon tax, which will quadruple to $40,000. Now, that may not seem like a lot to this Prime Minister and his trust fund, but it's a lot to the Hawes family. So my question is, will the Prime Minister call Brian Hawes? Will he explain to him how he expects him to pay this extra $40,000? Should he raise prices on Canadians, or should he cut production so that Canadians are forced to import food from foreign polluting farms?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, just a few days ago, Conservative members voted against the interests of farmers. Just a few days ago, they also voted against measures to promote women's participation in the economy, against free menstrual products, Mr. Speaker, against funding for sexual misconduct investigation, and against subsidizing childcare. Mr. Speaker, what do the Conservatives have against measures that support women?
Good question.
The Honourable Member for Peterborough-Kawartha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Classic Liberal deflection. When they are down, they will deflect at every fact they can. These are the facts. Under this Prime Minister, housing prices have doubled. Under this Prime Minister, food bank usage is the highest in history. On the OECD, we rank 35 out of 38 in teen mental health. Suicide. And who feeds families? Farmers. Who are they cutting? Farmers. So, Mr. Speaker, again, I will ask, will they axe the tax and make life affordable? And the jig is up. Everybody knows they are not telling the truth.
How embarrassing. This week they abandoned Israel at the United Nations, and that member should know that it is Canadian detonators that are ending up in the fields of Ukrainian farmers. They should be absolutely embarrassed and ashamed of themselves for abandoning the farmers of Ukraine. And Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the cost that Canadian farmers are paying for the carbon tax, Mr. Speaker, here's the reality. For Darren, It's 120 grand that he has to recoup somehow. That he has to recoup. This is an uncomfortable question because high prices are a feature, not a flaw of the carbon tax. Mr. Speaker, how do they expect Darren to pay the bills?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, the member mentioned Ukraine. It was shameful to see Conservative MPs attempt not once but 5 times to silence the MP from Etobicoke Centre when they pointed out the Conservative voting record against supporting Ukraine. Former Conservative Cabinet Minister Peter Kent.
Order, 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 order. Order. You know, we're just about 3 o'clock, and the more we attack one another, the louder it's going to get in here. So I would just suggest that everybody bring it down a notch. Christmas is coming. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
From the top. Mr. Speaker, former Conservative Cabinet Minister Peter Kent put it in this way, and I quote, "When partisan politics trumps principled unity and support for a valiant democracy," he was referring to the Conservative record voting against Ukraine and free trade. No amount of doublespeak or empty talking points will change that, Mr. Speaker.
2023 was a miserable year for farmers. Higher interest rates, higher input costs, floods, droughts, one misfortune after another. And the federal government is abandoning them. Ottawa doesn't even invest 5% of the value of farm production into agriculture, which is 4 times less than in Europe. We need an emergency fund for struggling farmers now. We've been saying it for months. Canada also needs to climb up from the bottom of the world's agricultural investment rankings. When will this government finally support our farmers? The Honourable Minister for Agriculture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I did meet with my honourable colleague yesterday. I fully understand the concern he has, but the program is under what you call the Business Risk Program, which is put together by the federal government and the provincial government and the territories, and the guidelines are put in place. Anything I can do to help, as I said yesterday to my honourable colleague, anything I can do to help the farmers in Quebec, I will do, but there are guidelines to follow.
2023 was a miserable year for our farmers. However, there's already an easy way to make 2024 a better year. The federal government can extend the January 18 deadline to repay the emergency account without loss of subsidy. It's an easy measure that would prevent farms from going bankrupt. It's an easy thing to do, and it would be such a relief to farmers who are working their fingers to the bone and who are still walking a tightrope. So please, let's announce some good news before the holidays. Will the government finally extend the January 18 deadline? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to the emergency business account, during COVID, our government was there to support businesses with wage subsidies, rent subsidies, and the emergency account. Now, when it comes to repaying that emergency account, Plan A, they have the money, they pay it back. And they get a certain amount forgiven. Plan B, they pay back some of it and get a certain amount of loan forgiveness. And then Plan C, they can stay with us for another 3 years and pay a 5% rate of interest.
Honourable member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Well, Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this NDP Liberal government, the costs of food production are at an all-time high. The truckers who transport our grain, deliver the fertilizer and fuel farmers need, and haul our groceries to the store for Canadians to buy, pay the carbon tax but pass it along to the farmer and the consumer. A trucking company in Swift Current pays $20,000 per truck per year in carbon tax. Once the Prime Minister quadruples this cost to $80,000, how does he expect them to pay for this? Will it be raising prices on Canadians, or should our farmers cut back on production so we are forced to import food from polluting foreign farms?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, the part that is actually quite incredible about the position taken by the Conservatives under their leader's guidance is that when you abandon Ukraine, you're not just abandoning over 1 million Ukrainian Canadians here in Canada, you're abandoning countless of thousands or millions of other East Europeans that are also concerned with pushing back against Russian authoritarianism. Who am I talking about, Mr. Speaker?
bringing disorder to the House by not answering the question.
The honourable member, just the honourable minister, 10 seconds in the response. I just want to make sure people keep it down so that the translators can hear what they're translating. The honourable minister of justice.
From the top, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, you're abandoning East European Canadians. You're abandoning Polish Canadians, Baltic Canadians, all of whom have a vested interest in pushing up against Russian authoritarianism under Putin. I wish the Conservatives could show some support.